So here we are
The third episode,
of Who
Shot Ya,
Who Shot Ya?
where we delve into the conspiracy theories, the evidence, and the facts concerning the murder of Tupac Shakur, Biggie Smalls, and others. How you feeling today, Mike?
I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like we've done pretty well so far in the last two episodes, and they're getting traction.
Are you feeling highly motivated?
I'm feeling always highly motivated.
Do you know the shadows behind you when you go places? Because most of the times, when you begin to talk about things like this, if you're not close, nothing happens. But if you start getting close and you'll start seeing shadows.
Well, I think being tapped on the shoulder by Rafael Perez's daughter and by Ted Field, I think that tells us something.
That would suggest that you might be tap dancing at the right show.
Yeah. I don't think we're necessarily like spot on yet, but I think we're definitely getting very close.
Well, clearly, what we've discussed is what is already known. I mean, we have not gotten to the point where we are creating the kind of elucidation where people are being shocked by what we know. I think what we've been able to do is to deduce what these things could potentially mean and to raise a level of consciousness, whereas people ask questions, why haven't the police arrested anyone?
Yeah, and I think there's an awful lot of crime that's happened, and zero arrests, zero of these murders have been solved.
In a scenario such as this, even if the murderer, the trigger man, was dead, they would make some kind of announcement and conclude, well, we think this individual was the killer of Tupac Shakur or Biggie Smalls, which raises suspicion that, once again, it's in higher order operation. And I've always said to myself that even back in the days where Eazy-E was the predominant rapper in the game, his life was constantly in jeopardy. As you know, I knew Eazy. And in fact, I ran into one of his bodyguards last night. It took a minute for me to recognize him because it's been years. But we talked, and he said, Omar, this thing, whatever it is, this thing that we unearthed, is still volatile. And I still don't talk about it, no matter who offers me what. Because first, the feelings are so deep and painful, and secondly, because of the danger involved with discussing the birth, death, and potentially the resurrection of gangster rap.
Well, makes sense, because there are so many people around this that are dead, and there continue to be. I mean, Russell Poole died 2 years ago. That's not that long ago. One of the things Russell talked about was the El Rey stomping death of Kelly Jamerson. And in that death, that murder was cleared. So they knew who did it, and they decided not to prosecute, but at least they could come out and make an announcement and say this murder is now cleared and it's off of our desk.
Well, sometimes that is the goal of a police department. They are different from a prosecutorial agency. Prosecutors are not satisfied until they get a guilty verdict. And so just naming someone as the killer is not going to be satisfactory for the prosecution. The police solving the murder in their own mind is their goal, because they frequently solve the murder and they find that the prosecution fails in their capacity and ability to bring forth a guilty plea, especially when you're talking about celebrities, because these guys have high-powered lawyers. They have access to just as much money as the prosecution, and they are experts at raising a reasonable doubt.
And then it comes down to the budget of prosecuting somebody that's high profile. And it gets expensive for the prosecution.
That's true. I would like to think, though, however, and I've experienced this in my own personal life, that if they want you, they spare no expense.
Yeah. And they continue. They don't care how long it takes either.
Especially if the prosecution is political. we all have our differing opinions of O.J. Simpson, but none of us would ever believe that you could be arrested and serve 9 years in prison for taking or stealing your own belongings.
Yeah.
That was a political prosecution in Las Vegas, but it was as real as it gets. It had the desired effect. He's been transformed from a middle-aged man to an old man because prison does that to you. And so we can't say that you can't be prosecuted or you won't be prosecuted if you're a reasonably well-known figure and the prosecution really has a political motivation to get you, which makes it strange, the killings of Tupac and Biggie. Let's just say, and we don't know this to be true, and I don't think that is true, but let's just say Suge had Biggie killed. What better motive, politically, could the prosecutorial agencies in Los Angeles and across America and the state of California have than to put Suge away?
Yeah.
See, that's telling to me.
And the fact that they don't put Suge away for that murder. And they've had many people come forward, including his former head of security, saying that Suge was behind it. And yet Suge's never been charged with this.
And of course, the motivation to prosecute Suge is obvious. He's Suge Knight.
Yeah.
I mean, people really have to look at African Americans in powerful positions from a historical standpoint. You cannot find one powerful African American man who had any political bent, whether it was conservative, whether it's liberal, whether it's leftist, right, that hasn't been prosecuted in the United States. I dare you to name one.
Well, and even Clarence Thomas. I mean, Clarence Thomas got confirmed in the Supreme Court, but it was under a tremendous cloud.
Which he said was a political lynching.
Yeah.
He still became a Supreme Court justice, but he's marred forever. There's been a movie made about what some say was his misconduct in the workplace. But you just don't find too many high-powered African-American men in powerful positions, and I say regardless of their political position or stance, that don't find themselves in front of a judge. So if Suge was the killer of Biggie Smalls, why wasn't he charged?
Well, one thing is he was in jail at the time, and not that you can't reach out from jail, but I talked to somebody this week who was in jail with him at the time Biggie was killed, and he talked about how he was being treated in jail, and he had hand shackles and feet shackles, and he was paraded around in a very humiliating manner while he was in jail.
Well, I've been there too. I spent 6 months in solitary confinement because the prison was protecting me, quote unquote. If you're going to be protected from anything, you want to be protected from the psychological impact and trauma of solitary confinement. I mean, 3 weeks in there, and you will begin to have conversations to people that aren't in your cell. And you might even start having a conversation with yourself. And after a couple months, you might start even answering the questions you were asking yourself. And I mean verbally. So, they do you no great favor by putting you under a prison or under a jail. And I've been in the basement of the Los Angeles County Jail, Mid Central. Not the new one, the old one. I've been in the basement of California State Penitentiary at Chino, Palm Hall. That's underground. And you have to have strong resolve and will to just do a month there, because you're not going to get a shower.
And what about getting onto a cell phone from down there and coordinating a murder
Absolutely not.
at 11 o'clock at night?
You don't even get to use the phone when you're in the hole.
So that's the allegation. The allegation is is that Suge coordinated the hit with David Mack and Rafael Perez on a cell phone from jail. And, I brought that up to this gentleman who I'm probably going to interview soon, and he said it's ludicrous to think that that could have happened.
Well, not to disparage the gentleman who performed the duties of guard at Chino, but there was a crew of guards, and I don't know if you remember, at Chino that were all arrested for pulling home invasion robberies, for selling drugs, and of course, if they were doing that on the outside of the jail, Lord knows what they might have been doing on the inside. So we can't say it's impossible.
Yeah.
We can say it's improbable.
Yeah, we can say it's highly difficult to think, and especially back then with cellular technology. I mean, we're talking 97. We were probably talking about, flip phones back then. But the reception probably wasn't as good as it is today. And there's an awful lot of concrete inside a jail.
If you're in deep segregation, the possibility that you're going to get a signal is slim and none. However, if we look back at the incident with Sheriff Baca and the burying or sequestering of that federal witness who had a cell phone, he was able to communicate with the federal agent who he was attached to. Now, where he was in the jail, not even the feds know, because they were moving him so much once they found out that he was a federal informant, that it's almost impossible to say it's impossible. I mean, it's nowadays, what would have been impossible in 1970, what would have been impossible in 1980, what would have been impossible in the 90s, is everyday occurrence in the 2000s.
Well, and one thing that we've seen is Russell Poole, who had originally blamed Suge Knight for both murders, at the very end of his life came out and said this could not have happened, and he wanted to apologize to Suge Knight because he felt bad. He felt badly about how he had treated Suge Knight.
Well, I gotta say this, for African Americans, things that come out and shock the world are commonplace to us. Theories that no one could have believed could be true, and then are later proven true, or things we just nod at because the impossible happens to us all the time. I mean, as you know, I've been tried twice for the same crime, 17 years apart.
Which doesn't happen in normal life in America.
Well, everyone says, what about...
double jeopardy.
What about it?
Yeah.
So, in scenarios where African Americans and highly powerful African Americans, and let's just say they are powerful as it relates to power within the African American community, that's something we have to consider. Suge is not a powerful man when you put him up against other powerful men who happen not to be black. Dr. Dre is not a powerful man when you put him up against other powerful men who happen to be white.
Yeah.
Amen?
Amen. Yeah.
But he had a limited amount of power, and in a black community and around black people, the average black people, he was extremely powerful, which means he could get things done.
Well, he was also somebody that was donating money to political campaigns, which makes him an influencer, if nothing else. And he was a tremendous influencer.
Suge did a great deal of good. People don't know that about Suge. Back in 1995, when I was the coach of Centennial High School, he offered to help me. I said, no, help the kids. What do you want? I said, build a new weight room. What's the price tag? 40 grand. Here, go get the stuff. I mean, he was that kind of guy. If he liked something, or if he liked someone, or if it was a cause that he could identify with, which was young African American males who were trying to better themselves through sports, which he did in his life, there was no limit to his charity. The problem is that if you take on an identity, I am the leader of the East Side Pirates, I am the leader of the mob, I am the leader of this thing that carries with it certain norms, values, and mores that cause great issues and great trauma, like murder, kidnapping. If you're going to be the head of that, you get all the heat from it. So certainly we know that if Suge had any device to communicate with, it was tapped. If they could get a camera anywhere Suge it was there. Was he more than likely surrounded by informants? Of course. And were these informants active? I mean, they didn't become informants after these occurrences. Were informants when they were around Suge. Definitely.
Well, and one thing we know from Russell Poole was that Suge Knight had his cell up at Mule Creek bugged. There was an active listening device inside of Suge's cell, and they never got anything from that.
My point exactly. I mean, if you're a powerful African American male, you have to live your life full knowing that you're going to get a knock on the door at some point. I mean, I don't try to, say that every African American male is pure. None of us are pure. But the thought that Bill Cosby would have to drug a groupie to have sex is ridiculous to me. Bill Cosby was a millionaire at age 26, a billionaire in his 30s. Who that has $1 billion would have to drug anyone? You'd have to drug them to keep you off you.
Will they be drugging you to have sex with you
Absolutely.
so they can have a kid with you?
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
Putting a hole in a condom and handing it to
Yeah.
you. I mean, Mike Tyson, I know this man well. And he was many things, but not a rapist.
Yeah.
He liked women, but he didn't have to take it. He was Mike Tyson, the champion of the world. You would have scoffed at the notion that Muhammad Ali raped someone.
Yeah.
That would have been scoffed at. However, if you develop enough information about someone to suggest that they have issues mentally and that they need certain medications, then you could probably put someone in the room with Mike Tyson. And you could say, if she said he raped me 13 years ago or 7 years ago, how are you going to prove otherwise?
Yeah.
And if it's a believable story. So Suge was the kind of person that it would not have taken much to bring a case against Suge Knight for killing Biggie Smalls. So why didn't they?
Because they don't want to dig into what's true because of fear of what it's going to cost.
Or perhaps he didn't do it.
Well, and meaning that, at some point there's going to be a defense that's mounted, and they're going to have to bring out who really did do this.
Yeah, well, if he did not do it, and even if it was done as revenge or to cover up the motive in another killing, why wouldn't someone who has I'm sure, an unlimited budget to find out who killed a celebrity of such grandeur status, why wouldn't somebody say, we're looking for information in this particular killing and there's a so-and-so reward out for it? Now listen, I was the mayor for 10 years. And traditionally, Compton had a high murder rate until the sheriffs came. And if there was a drive-by shooting or something of that nature, we wouldn't put up a reward. But if you killed a kid, it would be nothing for us to pull $50,000 out of our general fund and offer it as a reward for someone to tell us who did this terrible and heinous act. And we get the information almost immediately.
And now we're talking about two high-profile celebrities. You would think there would be $10 million.
And that's what makes it a suspicious thing. It just, as if I was the mayor of Los Angeles and a well-known celebrity was murdered in the streets of Los Angeles by people who were purportedly from Los Angeles and this person was from out of town, I would do everything I can to bring them to justice, and here's why. When celebrities feel they can't come to LA, LA is done. It's no longer La La Town. It's no longer Hollywood. It's no longer, you know, uh, Fantasyland. LA thrives on big names. I was driving today past StubHub, and I was telling my brother, man, for every two Charger fan, there's 50 Eagles fans. And we were talking about it because they're not here for that game. They're here to be in California.
Yeah.
To be in October and have a 89-degree day, for it to be almost 5 o'clock and it's still in the mid 70s with a cool breeze. I mean, this place is perfect if you've ever been to Philadelphia or been to Detroit or New York. You know, I'm not trying to offend those folks, but what we enjoy in the fall and even into the winter, they would kill for.
Yeah. And they're soon going to be in snowbanks.
Absolutely. So you don't want an unresolved murder of a superstar on your books. If you're the mayor of LA, if you're the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department, you want that thing solved and you want to send a message. You want to do all the things that traditionally are done, unless maybe you don't want to solve.
And the reason that they don't want that murder solved is because it leads back to a higher order. And
Rafael Perez and Nino Durden?
yeah, and David Mack, who he grew up somewhere around here, right?
Well, they say that he did. I didn't know him. And you have to remember, you know, the relationship between the West Side Piru and the East Side Piru began to become very tender as money became more prevalent on the East Side. And I'm talking about dark money. I'm not talking about what your parents was making and bringing home twice a week. I'm talking about, you know, owning a record company and being able to move large amounts of dope and move large amounts of guns. You know, people that start getting money don't want as many friends.
Yeah. Well, and especially when you go to work for LAPD or, you know, any other law enforcement agency, you really want to, any ties that you had with the community, and, you know, what he ended up claiming the minute he was arrested was that he was a gang member.
Well, see, from a street level perspective, one would say, well, why would, you know, one set of Pyrus want to get away from another one, right? But now, say cocaine is the issue. Well, there's a lot of money to be made in cocaine, and as long as you're out there hustling cocaine and both sides are making money, you know, that's not a motive to disassociate with one another. But if one side owns the police and the other side doesn't, if one side is looking at the other side saying, hey, these guys are riding around with the police, they got the police in the car with them, they go sit down and eat hamburgers with the police. We don't do that. Something else is going on.
Yeah.
So we start backing off you. And I'm not trying to say that that's what happened, but I certainly know that did not help the relationship between the West Side Pyrus and the East Side Pyrus. Now, when you say East Side Pyrus, you have to understand there are many different East Side Pyrus. There's the mob, and of course that's Suge and his crew. Then there's Ludus Park. Then there's Cross Atlantics. I mean, you know, there are fringe groups. And then there's cliques and sets. And so, I mean,
Where does Fruittown fit in?
well, Fruittown is a West Side Piru.
Okay.
They are West Side Piru. And the relationship between the actual Pyrus that grew up on Piru Street and Fruittown goes back a long way, because Fruittown identified Gonzalez Park as their part too. So it was not uncommon to see Fruittown Pyrus and West Side Pyrus in Gonzalez Park together. But there was a vast difference in the economic stability of those two communities. Remember, the people that are living on the west side of Compton are living in the latest homes built. even though they got there first, because the people on the east side are living in houses formerly owned by white people. So the houses may have been built in the 20s or the 30s, where the people that living on the west side are living in homes built in the 60s, and it's what, 1977?
Yeah.
1971, the birth of the Piru. So these guys are practically living in brand new homes. The homes are 4-bedroom, 2-car garage, carpet on the floor, grass in the front and the backyard. The schools on the west side are new. They have a different view than the guys that lived in Fruittown. If you go through Fruittown, and I'll take you through there one day, you can't drive 2 cars down one street at the same time. So while Fruittown Pirus felt comfortable in coming into the west side, I mean the actual mothership Pirus, you didn't find too many west side Pirus that wanted to go over and visit Fruittown. Because once you get in Fruittown, unless you're very sharp, you cannot get out. The streets are very narrow, and many of the streets don't even have street lights.
And so this creates a kind of street smarts, right, for anybody that's affiliated.
Well, what you have running through all these Piru gangs is that they're all bloods. There's a blood brother alliance, which is we don't strike each other, but we'll fight Crips. And so that's where their commonality lies. But in terms of the social economics, the level of education, the capacity to survive in a society, even if you're not a gang member, but you come from that community. When you go into the west side Pirus, you find youngsters that grew up to be surgeons, gynecologists, psychiatrists, principals, mayors. Very sophisticated group of people. Everybody's parents were still together.
And they're still street smart, though. They wouldn't.
But they are very street smarts because they not only understand the streets, but they come from homes where they read. They go to school every day. I mean, some of the most notorious West Side Pirus were 4.0 students. I mean, this is not myth, and those who are from the West Side know exactly who I'm talking about.
And so is there, like, trying to push them into law enforcement too?
There are guys that lived on Piru Street who were a part of the original 16 that became police officers. However, once they became police officers, they can't hang out with the homies.
Yeah.
Because you can't have the police with you. That's compromising everybody else. I mean, how are we going to discuss dealing with a particular individual from another neighborhood in terms of revenge hits, and the homie who's sitting next to me is a sheriff? And I can tell you, as a matter of fact, that when Tookie and Tramiel, the original Crips, came to Centennial and started the original fight between the 16 Pirus who were sitting in the cafeteria at Centennial, one of the main guys fighting back ended up a sheriff. The other one ended up becoming a detective in the Inglewood Police Department. So, and they were full-blown Pirus. They weren't like me. I just lived in the neighborhood, knew everybody. These guys were Piru boy soldiers. But they ended up becoming cops. But once they became cops, hey, how you doing, homie? Bye.
Yeah.
So for anybody who's a gang member to sit down and eat crab with a cop, or to sit down and share a champagne bottle with a cop, or to give a cop a Christmas present, or have that cop come to your wedding, it suggests that somebody's getting paid.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about your cop salary.
Yeah.
Now, the bigger question is, whoever they were working for, who allowed that? I mean, I'm the mayor of Compton. If I see a Compton PD working in a scenario or a situation that I know is risque, I'm going to go to the chief and say, what is our boy doing that? What's happening? How does that look to the community? And there were police officers who were disciplined, suspended, and some let go for much less. You know, as a cop, if you get caught in an extramarital affair, you'll get fired. If your credit goes bad, you'll get fired. If you file for bankruptcy, you'll get fired. So how does 3 or 4 cops roll around with a man who society at that point was painting as the next John Gotti, a black John Gotti? Yeah, these are things that make you scratch your head.
Absolutely.
And then they go back to the original question as to whether or not we really know who killed Biggie and Tupac. But police departments are notorious for protecting their reputation. Every African American male knows that if the police arrest you and they beat you up, you're going to be charged with assault on the police. You're going to be charged. While they're beating you down, they're going to charge you. And that will be the negotiating instrument by which they make you not sue or divulge publicly what was done to you. That's just a known fact around black people, especially black males. There's a kid who I had to get an attorney for who he probably at 26 operated at about a 9-year-old level. And the police broke his jaw, damaged his brain even further. He had black eyes for months. And they charged him. He was, I think, 5'4" maybe, and about 113 pounds. And he was charged with assault on 4 police officers. Come on, Mike.
Yeah.
Right?
So clearly there's an issue. And with these 2 murders, though, wouldn't you think that we would want to solve them to demonstrate?
Absolutely. But if solving them means the dissolution of my reputation as a police department, then no, I don't want to solve it. I mean, just think if it was clear that people in the Los Angeles Police Department or the Los Angeles Sheriff Department or the Long Beach PD were involved in the killing of a major star, you think the Rams would be here?
No.
You think major corporations would want to come here?
Yeah.
The reputation of these departments are sacrosanct with their capacity to sell whatever municipality they represent. And they protect that image, even to the point that if they have to, they'll plant evidence on you if, in fact, one of their cops went a little crazy and killed you.
And so with these 2 murders, we have also the economic damages of somebody like Biggie, who might have earned up to $1 billion. So not just the reputation of the police force, but the city of Los Angeles and the amount of money they'd have to pay out. If he would have earned $1 billion, triple damages for punitives, you're looking at a $4 billion
Franchise.
Yeah.
Easy.
And that's probably low. And then you look at if that leads then back to Tupac, add another maybe $4 or more billion. And then what about all of the other crimes ancillary and all those people that were affected that could then sue the department because they were maltreated? And now we're talking about maybe $15 billion of settlements.
And how many cases would have to be opened up and people freed from prison because there was an allegation that this officer did something untoward, and oh, by the way, he worked for Death Row, or he worked for Bad Boy, or he worked for one of the other major gangster rap labels, and now he's complicit in murder. So, you know, this is a delicate thing because the city of Los Angeles as a state is about the 14th largest state in the country. The city is.
Yeah.
And if you combine that with the county, my God, there are 13,000 sheriffs.
Yeah. With the jail employees, there are a total of 18,000 employees at the sheriff's.
Absolutely.
That's bigger than, I mean, I think it's the biggest law enforcement organization
In the country. And that's a lot of graves to open up if 20 or 30 of those cops are rotten.
Yeah.
And if you think that out of 18,000 people, none of them are rotten, it's something wrong with your arithmetic.
Well, and we know Sheriff Jim McDonnell has sent a list over to the Police Protective League that he wanted to send to the DA's office of 300 corrupt cops that he was blocked from doing. So we know there's at least 300 that he suspects.
Well, if I could give Sheriff Jim McDonnell some advice, sending that list to the Los Angeles District Attorney is like telling Billy the Kid that Jesse James did something wrong. I mean, I just got to be frank now.
Well, I'm sure that was done as a, CYA move.
Yeah, but politically, my brother.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office is the most politically motivated department in the world. People who are listening to this should know that when Eric Perriton, a deputy district attorney, ran against me for mayor, while he was prosecuting a death row artist, death row was funding his campaign against me. And he didn't get sanctioned and did not get fired. People who are listening should know that there was a district attorney, and I think he was in Major Crimes Bureau, who was renting a house to Suge Knight for what, $30,000 or $40,000 a month. It was a 2-bedroom.
Yeah.
But I mean, I went to trial, and you were there for a day, and I was actually charged with eating 2 brownies and 3 chocolate chip cookies beyond what I was supposed to spend for my food allocation. And I mean, they've got to have at least $4 million worth of expenses in trying me, but I'm political. So the notion that they won't spend a lot of money to achieve a political end is certainly something that is ridiculous if you look at some of the cases that these people have pursued for years and some of the other cases that they've never even spoken on. Where is D.A. Longo today?
Well, he's dead. Yeah.
That's not surprising to me.
Yeah. He's dead, and he was pushed out of the DA's office. And, not surprising. He was prosecuted for it, but they came back and said he didn't do anything wrong.
Was he prosecuted, or was
Well,
he?
it was a
Was it
disciplinary.
administrative prosecution?
It was a disciplinary action from the Bar Association.
Well, that would have been nice in my case.
Yeah.
How about a disciplinary action? They gave me prison time over a bowl of oatmeal.
Yeah, and then it was overturned on appeal, and they didn't like that, so they came after you again a second time.
I understand, but I'm just
No, but I mean, it's like
I'm-
it's a second bite at the apple. Even it's even worse.
Well, of course, because
Yeah.
you have the witnesses twice. But my point to you is that forget that it's me. Forget what the outcome was. Look at the inequality.
Yeah.
I'll bet you that more money has been expended in prosecuting me than investigating the murder of Biggie Smalls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we talked about the fact that this obviously wasn't a gangbanger hit, that they keep trying to sell that narrative, and you don't get a car boxed in with 6 barricades and a shooter comes by, that's not a gangbanger hit. We've also ruled out that it's the highest order, because in the highest order there would have been backup to make sure those guys were dead, and they didn't walk away from this, or they didn't go to the ambulance to the hospital. And so we've kind of centered that it's somewhere in between the highest order and gang stuff. What do you think?
Or a combination of both. But let me just say this to you. If, let's use a term, Illuminati. People that influence all the people. the shot callers. If they want you dead, they're gonna slip a microbe into your steak, and by the time you get through eating it, you'll be dead. I mean, they could, they've been able to induce heart attacks for years. You can be poisoned. To shoot somebody on the strip, come on. Those are not the wise men of Zion. That's not the Illuminatis. That's not the Skulls. This is some stuff where people who are proletariat workers.
Well, and staging a fight inside of a casino.
Correct.
I mean, that's clearly not something gangbangers would do, but it's also not something the Illuminati would do.
Absolutely not, because they're going to make sure no one has anyone to trace any of the actions that they take. Maybe you'll find out 50 years later who shot John Kennedy for real. You still don't know. You just know it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, and that he was killed immediately.
Absolutely.
I mean, dead men tell no tales.
They tell no tales. And then how did you turn around a few years later and kill Bobby Kennedy when you knew he was a target? Who made that mistake? You still don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But in those murders, the old-fashioned assassinations, there's a patsy sitting there waiting to be arrested. He's already got a dossier and a background in the hands of the feds that's going to get turned over to the local police, and it's going to be a state prosecution, so the feds wipe their hands of it, and then the government is free of it. But this is something different. Biggie and Tupac. This looks like something. And because it looks like something, but it's not something that happened on Grape Street. It's not something that happened in Fruittown. These murders took place in highly populated, pretty well-to-do communities. How they look don't match the scenery and the ambiance and milieu, if I might, around them. Now, I'm going to tell you straight up, I knew a lot of gang members. I mean, I grew up here, so I had to know them. They were sitting in class with me. And if you went to the average gangbanger and said, let's kill them on the Las Vegas Strip, they would say, are you crazy? How are we going to get away? Listen, if you're black, you know for a fact not to go to Las Vegas and act a fool. You can't, if you're black, even go to Vegas and act normal. Because the Las Vegas police routinely pull over, frisk, search, follow black men, especially if they're in that age group. This is just ridiculous to think that some gang person decided they were going to hit a celebrity on the Sunset Strip, on the Vegas Strip, right down the street from Beverly Hills.
Or even on Fairfax and Wilshire.
Listen, Mike, I was the mayor of Compton, well-known person, in magazines, on television. When I would drive through Beverly Hills when I was the mayor, I was petrified. Because before I was any of that, I was black. And I know that and I don't care who wants to argue the point, the police are trained to think, what is this black man doing here? So when you talk about a museum in the middle of the west side of Los Angeles, where down the street the offices of people like Stan Lathan and other noteworthy individuals go every day, that you just going to go and commit murder there? No. That's not coming out the minds of a guy that's from Compton. And this is why the subsequent murders that took place behind those killings all took place in Compton. Because you can get away with it here. You start shooting here, the people know, don't look out the window. When the police come, don't tell anybody what you saw.
Don't know nothing. Don't want to know nothing.
I
and
don't want to know.
Don't want anything volunteered to me.
Ma'am, your neighbor said you were looking out the window when this happened. She lying. Because they know the drill. Okay? So to kill somebody in an area where you probably could not control the various witnesses, you can't control what they're going to say and who they're going to say it to. You know, because a lot of witness testimony is created after the fact. It happens after the police. You know, the police have a tendency to put snitches in the area where something happens, and they just listen. You know, for the folks that don't know, if you go to the barbershop and you're down there running your mouth, somebody in there, and it may be the one cutting your hair, is talking to the cops. I mean, and these are not things I dreamt of. I was the mayor of the 9th largest city in the county of Los Angeles. Barbershops, coffee shops, donut shops. Go down there and run your mouth. The police maintain and keep listening posts, and they maintain and keep listeners. So if they wanted to solve these murders, it would be solved.
Well, and both of them happened in very populated areas where there were people all around. And yet, what happens? They disperse the witnesses, they don't get witness cards, they don't have follow-up phone numbers. Very similar to what happened to Suge at the One Oak nightclub.
Never even been a lineup. Now think about that.
Yeah. With Suge at the One Oak nightclub, they came in and turned out the club. They had 37 cameras inside that club and an off-duty sheriff lets in the shooters, and we never hear anything about it anymore.
You know, Mike, what's interesting is even though we have very similar perspectives of what happened, you don't really have to be cautious about what you say. That does not mean that you're out the briar patch by any means, broaching topics such as these. But there are so many ways to silence African American males that are acceptable to society. And, you know, the average white person, when they hear that a black person has been arrested for something or has been shot by something, they think, what did he do? He had to be doing something. I mean, by gosh, our cops just don't drive around and kill people. They would be mistaken. I settled more police brutality cases in Compton that you could shake a stick at. Cases where cops literally shot people, had them on the ground, reloaded, and shot them again. So, you know, I'm awful careful about what I say.
Sure.
And you got to read between the lines.
Of course.
But if anyone thinks that somebody who's a gang member is going to figure they can commit murder on the most popular rapper in the world on the Sunset Strip and get away with it, that's just simply not how gang members think. The key is that they don't want to get caught. And since they don't normally have connectedness to the police and connectedness to judges and prosecutors, that means the execution of the hit has to happen in such a way where the possibility of them getting away is far greater than the possibility of getting caught. Because if you're black and you do something like that, you're going to get 1 or 2 sentences, life in prison or death.
So what about even just rolling up on a Death Row Records entourage that was known to employ off-duty police officers and have lots of guns in that entourage? Wouldn't that also just be kind of foolish?
Well, what about the possibility of just you being a Crip and rolling up on Suge?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, Suge alone.
I mean, this is Suge Knight.
Yeah. This is somebody who pistol whipped people with guns on a regular.
On a regular basis. Who's going to just roll up on him?
Nobody. Nobody that's thinking, you know, nobody that's street smart.
You could sing Keith Sweat right now. Nobody, baby. Nobody.
And yet, this shooting happens in Las Vegas.
And what they both have in common is nobody's caught. And I mean, that's almost impossible.
And if you would almost have to know that the entourage had been disarmed for you to roll up on that entourage with any degree of certainty that you were going to get away with it.
You would either have to know it for a fact, or you're making an assumption that may cost you your life. I mean, just, say they don't know it. See, I like to use POE, process elimination. I'm a gang member. I'm getting ready to go kill Tupac, and I'm going to kill Suge Knight. And I'm just going to roll up and shoot him. Do I think that's doable? No.
No, especially not the legend of Suge Knight back
And
then.
he's got his multi-million-dollar boy in the front seat?
Yeah.
Come on.
At the height of Suge Knight's career with Death Row Records.
So I think we can dismiss the gangbang theory. We can dismiss that it was a revenge hit. We can dismiss the notion that it wasn't well planned. We can dismiss the notion that the killer remains unnamed. Somebody knows who he is. And I think you have some documentation that we're going to be discussing in the upcoming episodes of who he is. I mean, the trigger puller. But as I told you, I've never been interested in the guy who pulled the trigger. I want to know who provided the gun and the bullets, who provided the plans,
The cover,
the cover, the scenario. That's something that would, pique my interest. And for those who are out there listening, it should pique your interest as well. Because Martin Luther King, if he was right about anything, was right about this. A threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And when people can just decide they want you dead and pull it off wherever they feel like pulling it off and nothing happens, you can't be feeling safe as an American citizen. That means if you're a Ku Klux Klan, you can be clipped. If you're a member of the mafia, you can be clipped.
if you're a member of Congress.
You can be clipped. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now I'm glad you brought that up. Let's talk about the shooting of the congressman. The killer didn't get off the property.
Yeah.
And they were in a secluded park that's set up for these people to practice every day. He didn't get off the property, was dead before he got out the vicinity. He never even got back to his car. Now that's real life. That's what happens when you have armed security around you. And you don't need 20 or 30 of them. You just need one that can shoot. So out of all these people who are police officers and security guards and licensed to carry firearms and who train, not one of them got a shot off back at the assailant?
In either murder.
This is
It's laughable.
It's laughable.
Yeah.
It's laughable. And perhaps the reason why people are not laughing more is they're afraid they might be the next person to get shot at Food for Less, or in your case, probably Vons,
Yeah.
or Pavilions. They would shoot me at Freddie's check cashing over on Wilmington.
Well, don't tell everybody where you're going.
Oh, I never go to Freddie's check cashing. If you're looking for me there, you won't find me.
No. Everybody look for Omar over
Hey,
at
listen,
Freddie's
because
check
I haven't had a
because
check
he won't
in
be
years.
there.
I haven't had a check in years, so you won't find me there.
Which brings up a really good segue of something that I personally wanted to talk about. It has been extremely expensive for Omar Bradley to be going through all of these legal struggles. And anybody out there that wants to make a donation to the Mayor Omar Bradley Legal Defense Fund, you can send a check off. I will put a P.O. Box address in the notes to this, and you guys can make donations to his legal defense fund to help him shoulder the cost, because he's still going through legal issues. And not to get too much into that, but if you want to make a donation, that would be a great place to make a donation.
I've been under criminal prosecution longer than I believe any politician in the history of the United States. The initial investigation against me began before I was elected.
Wow.
That was back in 1991, an FBI sting operation. And when they were unsuccessful, right after they got through, here comes the DA.
I bumped into attorney Tom Mesereau in Century City, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months ago. And I talked to him specifically about Omar Bradley. And when he was the mayor, they were pushing suitcases full of cash. And they were all on surveillance tapes. And Omar was pushing those suitcases back, saying, no, thank you. And this went on, according to Tom Mesereau, for 3 or 4 years. And when he subpoenaed in an unrelated case the tapes, he sat and watched these, and he said it was extremely offensive to him that they kept doing this and trying to entrap the former mayor of Compton when he was the mayor.
Well, there's always an assumption, and it's sad, and it's something that we have to talk about so that we can be better as a country. It's sad to assume that because someone is black, they're guilty. Now, here's what's amazing to me. There is a secretary in the Trump administration who spent $40,000 on one airplane trip. And he has said he's going to pay the money back. I spent $26 on a meal, and I was tried and convicted and given 3 years in prison. So when we talk about the realm of possibility, as an African American male, I'm absolutely convinced that the government could have played a role in what happened to these two young men. What role they played, I don't know. But you can't say it's impossible. Because what I think is impossible is for me to go to a hotel in 1999, put up a credit card with my name on it to pay for something, and for in 2017, the Los Angeles County, 2017, 19 years later, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office convinced 12 citizens that A, somebody remembers that, B, that there was a witness, because there was not one witness to anything they brought up because they're dead or they don't remember anymore. And they still got a conviction. So if if what was the jury stacked? Of course. And some of the prejudices that white Americans have against blacks have them too. Because we're just as diseased with this notion that black men are criminals as white folks are. You can go into a black household and they'll tell you, I'm not hiring a black plumber. I don't want a black lawyer. I don't go see a black doctor. Because the notion of the master class, which is the white class, their notions permeate education and morals, mores, codes, ethics of black people, because we are subject to whatever whites think. And so you get black people that will find a black man guilty and they don't even know they're thinking white. He had to have done something. And the reason why I bring this up, and I just want to segue and then we'll get back to who shot you. What is more outstanding? To stand for something or to kneel before something?
Well, the kneeling is a peaceful protest. And, anytime something's done peacefully, I think we need to applaud it in this country, because we live in a place where we can do things peacefully. And if it escalates to violence, it's probably not going to be a result any of us benefit from.
The greatest war that America's citizens have to fight is the one between their ears. If anyone thinks that football players taking a knee is going to stop a cop from killing a black person when that is what they want to do, is out of their mind. And for African American males to believe, to be simple enough to think that you can change this society by putting your clean uniform on the ground and making it dirty, you are out of your mind. You are out of your mind.
So what's the solution?
Well, the solution is beyond the capacity of anybody to grasp because racism is inherent. Once a thing is learned and inculcated into the culture of one people about another people, the people that is subject to that inculcation cannot be changed by the people they are oppressing.
I mean, it's really inherent in our language, isn't it?
Blackballed,
Yeah, black magic, white magic.
spayed,
Yeah.
blackmailed, pictures of a white Jesus. Even saying his name was Jesus when you know there were no J's in the alphabet where Jesus lived. But, you just gotta kind of work on an interpersonal level with people and then get to the point where you know this is a good person. Not a good white man, not a good black man, but a good person.
Well, then, I mean, we're really talking about what Martin Luther King said. There were two sides to that. And it was, let's not judge somebody by the color of their skin, but
By
let's
the
judge
content
them
of their character.
by the content of their character. And that's really where we need to get to in society. And we're clearly not there.
We're not even close.
No. And, we think we made so much progress since the 60s. And yet, here we sit. And it doesn't seem like that progress is really that great in the last few years. And, we all, I think, were lulled to sleep in the white community thinking that everything's great because the 60s, oh yeah, everything was racist, and it's not that way today. But yet we still have a problem.
I think the allure of being accepted by my peers and those that I interact with is one of the most dangerous things that white Americans have to grapple with. What I think is that the white ball players who took a knee before the NFL made it fashionable were probably the most courageous because they are members of that segment of society who has institutionalized racism, codified racism, and made racism the order of the day. So I'll give you an example, and this is something that I don't tell a lot of people about because, people remember this. I have friends that remember this incident. I was at Centennial once, and of course, I told you before, I had a lot of friends that were Crips and guys that grew up in Crip neighborhoods, and there was some Pirus that I knew. One of them liked a girl, and he found out that this guy who lived in a Crip neighborhood was seeing his girl. And I was standing with some friends who lived in a Crip neighborhood. They lived in the front hood Crips. And these Pirus caught up with this guy, and he had a cast on his leg from his hip down to his foot. And I saw them take shovels that the custodians had left out and start beating him. Beating him not just with the flat part of the shovel, but taking the sharp part of the shovel and trying to break through his cast. And my initial response, even though these were Pirus who were doing this, was to go over and help this guy, my friends. But the guys who were Crips next to me grabbed me and said, "Man, you can't go over there and get involved in that because that's your people." And it just, I mean, that's got to be 43 years old, but I never forgot it. That to correct your people when they are doing wrong is sometimes more dangerous than for somebody who does not belong to that set to try to correct them. Because you got to live with them. And we all want to be recognized by our own kind. I mean, this is why Suge took on the personage of gangbanger. Because everybody from his hood, not everybody, but the youngsters from his hood, that's what they were. And if you wanted their respect, you had to do what they did. And very few people escaped that. I mean, you know, I can tell you in the West Side Pyrus, if you were smart, they wouldn't let you gangbang. If you looked like you had a future, you know, no, you can't do it. You're out. Go to class and bring good grades. But I don't know if that was the case on the East Side. I don't know. You know, I know a lot of East Side, but I don't know that part because that was steeped in there, in our culture. Good kids get a pass. Now, for those white guys to turn on their own and say, look, I'm going to go with what is right, forget what is best, that's big. And at the root of this Biggie and Tupac stuff is that right there. There's some cops that know about some cops that helped this happen.
Yeah.
And they have to be bigger than their own culture and their own racial designation and just come out and say, this is who was involved in that. And that's very rare.
Yeah. There's enough people out there that know what happened that it is time for them to come forward and tell what they know.
And with that, it's time to wrap it up. That's
Absolutely.
the third episode of Who Shot Ya? Next week, I'm sure you're going to be bringing some very powerful documents for artists to
Absolutely.
get a whiff of and things that would, you know, help us understand.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And if you are so inclined, feel free to make a donation to the former mayor's legal defense fund. And it's a really good cause only because I know this man's heart, and he is a born leader who is not done leading yet, but he needs a little bit of help.
Mike, as always, it's great sharing these notions with you. See you next week.
Okay.